Now, when we shift to the regional or international level and begin to look at the impact, that internally displaced persons have, the number one factor that we have to consider is the fact that the expansion of IDP populations, once this demography expands, the likelihood of spillover of conflict across borders becomes very eminent. That is a critical factor we need to take cognizance of. Once the conflict within that environment becomes protracted over a long period of time, IDPs are created, and the likelihood of these displaced persons returning back to their locations becomes more and more unlikely with time as the conflict persists over a period of time. So from being IDPs, as the population swells, the likelihood of many of these IDPs, transforming into refugees. That means they are no longer internally displaced, but they are now being pushed across the borders of their nation into either a neighboring nation, resulting into their political classification changing from IDPs to refugees. Now, usually when you have refugees pushing, from one country transiting into another country, the likelihood of them transferring the conflict that is within the borders of their own country into the borders of the neighboring country is usually very, very highly likely. We've seen this all over the world in several countries, such that the factors that initially created, this conflict within their own borders, usually go along with them. And sometimes because of the pressure that they have now placed on the host communities across international borders, the likelihood of conflict emerging there is high, in the sense that these two communities now, the host community and the international refugee community that is flowing in as former IDPs, are competing for resources. They are competing for resources. Now, if those resources in the host communities across borders are not sufficient, even for those communities, then that means there's a high level of tension between the two cohabiting or coexisting peoples. That tension is often likely to spill into small flares, fighting of disagreement that, if not properly handled, becomes full-blown wars or conflicts. Okay? Now, a second very critical factor that emerges at the regional stroke international level with reference to security is the increase in transnational crime and trafficking. So when IDPs begin to flow into another country, transforming them into refugees, the likelihood of transnational crime becomes high. The same forms of crimes that are rampant within IDP camps, that are rampant within the locality of that conflict, of the regional conflict, often transferred. They are often transferred and find expression in the neighboring countries. The same thing with trafficking. The instability and lawlessness created by large ungoverned IDP populations can facilitate the operations of transnational crime networks, dealing in arms, in drugs, and also in people. This is something that is very, very highly likely within these particular environments. Now, a third factor that is very critical that we must have at the back of our mind is the long-term instability and radicalization. Once conflict, it becomes subsists for a long period of time, it now becomes rooted in the consciousness of the population, the hatred, the grievances They now become part of the psychological construct of those people. Now, once that reaches that stage, it becomes very difficult to extricate these people from the conflict, because their existence, their thinking, their mindset has now become aligned with the conflict. They don't only experience the conflict, they also believe in it. It has become part of their life. And as a consequence of this affects the outlook of the people, creating a vicious circle of conflict. Conflict, displacement, conflict. Conflict, displacement, conflict. So, even though it spills to other neighboring communities or nations, that circle is now maintained because of the longevity, of that particular conflict. So, uh, the the issue of internally displaced persons is very, very critical when we deal with global peace uh, and security studies. Uh, any form of engagement with security must usually take cognizance of all the various factors that are critical, in dealing with the issue of internally displaced persons and seeking forms of redress for them in order for the peace building process to be able to take place. In our next topic, in the next class, we are going to try to look at peace building, disarmament, and things like that, in order to understand the next level of engaging with peace when we are dealing with societies that have become broken down as a consequence of persistent conflicts. So, thank you very much for being in this class. I'll see you in the next class. Please, let's prepare for our exams, because very soon the exams will be coming up. Thank you very much.